Be a good morning. It should be a Boker Tov. We should hear Besoros Tovos, Yeshuas, V'Nachamos, please God. We should hear only good news. Hostages be brought home in a sweeping victory. Soldiers return to their families. Peace for our brothers and sisters in Israel and around the world. Our Parsha series sponsor, we remain very grateful to Becky and Avi Katz and family who've dedicated the Parsha series in loving memory of David Grossman, in memory of Lilu Nishmas David Ben Menachem Manish. This morning's shir is also sponsored by Erica and Perry Galler in memory of her mother, Irene Markowitz, is Neshama Shadav and Aliyah, in honor of the wedding of Daniela Rose to Judah Lewis, dedicated by their parents, Dr. Jerry and Esther Friedman, Dr. Moshe and Alana Wertenthal of Teaneck, in tribute to grandmothers Natalie Friedman, Dorothy Roll, and Esther Wertenthal. Wonderful occasion and simcha. Anonymously, in appreciation of the weekly shir. Thank you so much. Appreciation right back at you. And by Miriam Nussbaum on the outside of her beloved husband, Alan Nussbaum, Asher Ben Eliezer, Neshama Shadav and Aliyah. Thank you to all of our generous sponsors. As always, we encourage and invite you to stay after the shir. The more we stay, the quicker it'll go, and the more times we can complete all of Sefer Tehillim. We come not only to learn, but to daven. The combination of our learning and our davening. B'charbi u'b'kashti, we'll learn this morning. Please God should pierce the heavens and be heard and bring only good news. Page 268, Parshas Vayechi, the last Parsha of the book of Bereshis. This is a Shabbos Chazak, and boy, do we need the chizuk as we turn to one another and say Chazak, Chazak, and together Nis Chazek. It's only when Jews together turn to each other, Chazak, Chazak, offer chizuk to each other, Nis Chazek, can we find strength together. So here we have the storyline continue to unfold. We know the story, and yet we're at the edge of our seats. What will happen next? Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim, Shva Esrei Shana, Vayehi Yemei Yaakov Shnei Chayav Sheva Shanim, V'Arba'im U'Ma'ah Shana. Yaakov, reunited, long awaited, with his son Yosef. The brothers are back together again. Are they? Are they back together? Is it only during Yaakov's lifetime? Was it real and authentic? Was it superficial and surface? We'll see more. But Yaakov comes to live in Mitzrayim. And how long is he there? He lives in Mitzrayim for Shva Esrei Shana, 17 years. Shnei Chayav Sheva Shanim V'Arba'im U'Ma'ah Shana. The years of his life are 147 years. The Baal HaTurim tells us, Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz lo mashlo chaya yamim tovim bal Otzar ela keminyan Vayechi. The only days of his life that he lived without pain, without anguish, without struggle, without crisis, were the same as the number, the numerical value, the Gematria Vayechi Yud Zayin Shalom Yishanol Yosef Ad Shenimkar. The 17 years from when Yosef was born until Yosef was sold, those were peaceful and those were happy. The Yud Zayin Shalom in Mitzrayim, the 17 years in Mitzrayim, his retirement years. He went to the BRS afternoon kollel, the kollel boker, the night kollel, the scholars in residence program, shtickle majan, a little walk around the circle. Davar achar vayechi Yaakov beretz Mitzrayim shva esrei shana, sha'arishonim lo hayu chayim sharei amar ki eir al bnei Eva Shaola. So Yesh Layin, wonders of Druck in his beautiful Sefer Lavos Eish. I don't know if it's come out on the other. I only have it on Bereshis. I don't know if it came out yet on Shmos, just like Tifer Shmuel. I don't know. If you're listening and you know, and you can send me the Lavos Eish and the Tifer Shmuel on Shmos by next week, we'd be very grateful. So wonders of Druck. Yesh Layin b'lashon hakatz vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim. Why does it say Vayechi Yaakov, not Vayehi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim? It would have been more accurate. It would have been more appropriate to describe, and Yaakov lived, and Yaakov was, and Yaakov existed, and Yaakov inhabited Mitzrayim for 17 years. Or Vayeshev Yaakov beretz Mitzrayim. He moved because Mitzrayim had no state income tax, so he moved. He moved to Mitzrayim. He went to the DMV, updated his driver's license, officially changed his residence, proved to the IRS more than 51% of the times of the days. He had the travelogue. So Ma'u Lashon Vayechi. It should just say he took up residence. He existed. What do you mean Vayechi? Vayechi is an unusual word. Vayeshev, he resided, he moved in. So from the Baal HaTurim, it seems Shekasav ki ad achshav lo hayu ela chayim. Because it seems that until now, Yaakov's life was not a life. Yaakov's life was filled with crisis and misery and challenge and struggle. As he said about himself, ki ered al b'ni vel sha'olam. V'ila b'shanim ha'acharona sh'ad b'Mitzrayim, kvar noda lo she'Yosef ben Ochai. Only those last years in Mitzrayim, when he saw that Yosef was alive, and the beautiful family that Yosef built, and the beautiful life that Yosef crafted, he was no longer in a perpetual state of mourning and grieving. He was no longer worried. He was able to see Yosef and Yosef's family and Yosef's life. And these were the only years that he was really alive. The days that he was not B'tzar, the days that he was able to exhale, he was able to breathe, he was able to have some menuchas hanefesh, those only numbered the same numerical value of Vayechi. Kein matzin beferish Rabbeinu Chaim Paltiel al Torah shekasav kein al kusha shik shalom lo kasav vayihu yimei Yaakov kemo gabe Sarah. It says with Sarah vayihu chaye Sarah. V'yishlomer melamed shelo chaye Yaakov shanim tovas el kamin vayechi tainu lamed al shanim. It was only 34 years. Those are the only years that he lived. Vayechi, the gematria, 34 years, because all of his days were filled with tsar until then. However, says Rav Druck, maybe you could explain alternatively. Maybe you could explain a little bit differently. In Parsha Vayigash, after we're told, Shesipra Achem liYaakov sheYosef chai, v'hu moshel b'Mitzrayim. After we're told, after Yaakov was told that Yosef is still alive, great news. You were right. To be inconsolable all those years, you were right. Yosef is still alive. And not only is he alive, it's not that he's barely holding on. It's not he's some homeless man on the side of the road. It's not that we found him in a shelter. He is the viceroy of all of Egypt. What does the Torah tell us? Last week's Parsha. Vatechi ruach Yaakov avihem. Yaakov, when he heard that news, was ki'ilu revived. It's as if CPR was on. He came back to life. Uncles, the Targum there translates, V'sharas ruach kudsha al Yaakov avuhon. Vatechi means the Shechina, Ruach HaKodesh returned. Yaakov became spirited, alive, soulful. The presence of Hashem dwelled upon him once again. Because the HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Yaakov Avinu, Anochi Akela Elokei Avicha HaTorah Mir de Mitzrayim, Ki legoy gadol asimcha sham, Anochi Eiridimcha Mitzrayim, Va'anochi Ela Gam Alo, Alcha Gam Alo. We spoke about a Chalash Shivas Arriva Derivin last week. Anochi, the Tzvarim HaKadoshim say Anochi is Anochi of Aseres HaDibros. Hashem said Anochi, Imo Anochi B'tzara. I'm going down the Shekhinah himself. I'm going with you. Al tira mer de Mitzrayim, said Rashi, don't worry, don't be fearful, don't be stressed out about going down to Mitzrayim. Yaakov was very worried about going to Chutz La'aretz. He was very worried. I know that my system, I know that Yiddishkeit can thrive where? The holy religion in the holy land, with the holy people, that winning triad, that winning combination, I know can win. But Chutz La'aretz, can it adapt? Can it pivot? Can it survive? Will it thrive? Yaakov was worried. The Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer says, "Shechashu Yaakov Avinu loredes Mitzrayim. Hayimikevet shemokem ashros hashchina hu rak be'eretz Yisrael." We know the Shechina can only dwell where? In Israel. That's why prophets, Nevi'im, only prophesized where? In the land of Israel. In HaKadosh Baruch Hu masher Shechina so b'chutz la'aretz. V'lachein chashash Yaakov hayim mitztayar le'ir Mitzrayim. He just got the Shechina back. Vatechi. He was just revived. He just again became this instrument, this medium of divine countenance, divine presence. He didn't want to go to Chutz La'aretz, Shmutz La'aretz, your grandchildren call it when they come back from the year in Israel. He didn't want to go to Shmutz La'aretz where he would lose the Shechina. Al Ken Yiftiach L'HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Anochi Eiridimcha Mitzrayim. But don't worry, I'm going with you, and I'm going to come back with you. Shagam Sham Be'eretz Mitzrayim Tiyashras HaShechina Alav. Even there, exception. Even there, an exceptional circumstance, I'll be with you. So now we understand, what does it mean? Vayechi Yaakov, says Rabbi Druck, Ki ba kasav lo mar she'achein niskayim ha'havtacha she'Hakadosh Baruch Hu anochi eridimcha Mitzrayim. Because indeed, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's word came true. Sharsa al Yaakov hashchina af be'eretz Mitzrayim. Even in Galus, it wasn't a step down. They didn't lose something. The Shechina was present. Vayechi Yaakov, his Yiddishkeit thrived, it flourished. He was able to transmit his Mesorah. The Shechina was present even in Chutz La'aretz. So that's why it doesn't simply say Vayeshev. He dwelled. He didn't just change his residence. Vayechi. He lived with the Shechina. He lived with the Shechina. Don't give up and don't forfeit and don't be hopeless. That in Chutz La'aretz, among non-Jewish influence and non-Jewish host nation, we can. The Shechina can be found even here. And then Rav Druck offers a second insight. Says Rav Druck, Divrei Balatam Malul Tzurchem Bir. Ketzanitan Lomash Yaakov Chai Shlo B'Tzar B'Osa Yizayin Shana Beis Leidas Yosef Atzadik Ad Mechira. So he asks a more fundamental question. The HaTurim asserted that the 17 years from when Yosef was born until Yosef was sold were the only peaceful 17 years of Yaakov's life. But let's review the 17 years of Yosef's childhood. Hello, Bosam Shanim Hu Haya B'Beis Lavan HaArami. Where was Yaakov? When Yosef was a child, an adolescent, where was Yaakov? He was in the house of his father-in-law, Lavan. Lachar became Lavan Radav Acharav. And then, when Yaakov has the courage and tells his wives, we're out of here, let's go. Ganuk, it's enough. What happens? Lavan pursues, Lavan chases. And then what happens? Rachel ishto Mesa Baderach. Our Parsha, we have that interesting language. Mesa alai Rachel. I point it out every year. It sounds like Lahavda Chalila, Yaakov's talking about his car. It gave out on him on the highway. My car died on me. Could you imagine? Mesa alai Rachel. Rachel went up and died on me on the way. So in those 17 years, he had to navigate and survive the house of his wicked father-in-law Lavan. Lavan runs after him and pursues him. His wife dies young, premature. He confronts and reunites his brother Esav, prepared for war, for battle. By the way, he's injured in the wrestling match with the Sarasol Esav. His daughter Dina is #MeToo. Unless you're a Jew, Dina is raped and taken by Shechem. Yaakov What does Rav Druck on this Baal HaTurim? What? Only the 34-year, what? 17 years of Yosef's childhood, those were the only peaceful years of his life? After that was misery? Those were peaceful years, those were good years? We just listed all kinds of debilitating, difficult, anxiety-ridden, challenge, crisis incidents of Yaakov's early life, of Yosef's childhood. So how could he say those 17 years were easy? Nitan levar zos apia mesupar lechem mitamidav hamufakim shalagon Rav Nachum Partzevitz. He tells a story. The same story is told of Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. There was a Talmud of Rav Nachum shloigil lekama shiurim. He didn't come to shir. He missed shir several times. So I asked Rav Nachum, Madu echsarta min hashiurim eifa isa? Where have you been? What's going on? You've been absent. What's going on? Heishav Talmud hayalot sar gidul banim. So the student said, Rabbi, I'm so sorry I missed shir. I'm so sorry I missed kollel, I missed seder, I wasn't in the base medrash. I'm struggling. Tsar gidul banim. What's tsar gidul banim? I'm going through tsar gidul banim, the pain of child rearing. One child had a fever. The other one had a virus. The third had to run to the doctor in the middle of the night. And that's why I missed all the shiurim. But what can I do? Tsar gidul banim. So said Rab Nachum, he turned to him and he said, this is Nish Tsar Gidul Banim. You know what that's called? Not Tsar Gidul Banim. You know what that's called? Gidul Banim. That's called Gidul Banim. That's called having children. Children get sick and children don't listen. And children get in trouble and children get bad grades. And children make a mess and children... That's called child rearing. That's not Tsar Gidul Banim. That's Gidul Banim. That's Gidul Banim. They said the same story of Rav Yaakov. Rav Yaakov met a Talmud, asked how it's going, and he said, I'm struggling terribly. Tsar Gidul Banim, tell me what's the matter. And he said, this child is socially with friends, this one in school, this one. Rav Yaakov said, that's not Tsar Gidul Banim, that's called Gidul Banim. That's Gidul Banim, that's built in. That goes with the territory. That's called raising children. Ma'im kain Tsar Gidul Banim. So what is Tsar Gidul Banim then? Said Rab Nachum, Kasher Adam Mashkiv v'torech harbe b'Gidul Banim mitztar akach, Osalelus kiyam l'man yiladav, Mashkiv b'hem es kol gufa v'kaspo, l'vasof ha'yeled boid v'yotze l'tar b'zra, o az nimtza ki kol Gidul Banim hofich lios tsar echad gadol. Person invests and gives and sacrifices everything. Financially, they invest in their children. They give up their sleep. They give their emotion. Everything is invested in that child. And that child chooses a different path. That child makes choices that are irreparable. That child disappoints. That's called Tsar Gidul Banim. That's a Gidul Banim. You put everything into the child, and what you got back in return is Tsar, is a Tsar. Kimikol ha'mamit shelo legalos banav b'derech HaTorah l'kibul ki im Tsar gadol. Zeu Tsar Gidul Banim. Aval hanisyonos haregilim hayom yomiyim sheis b'soch Gidul Banim. But the daily challenges of raising children, yeah, this one's going to overturn their cereal bowl. This one threw up on the chair. This one had a messy diaper. This one got in trouble in school. This one got a bad grade. This one didn't do the homework. That's just called Gidul Banim. That's not called Sar Gidul Banim. Scope, perspective, scope. We have to know. B'doma I have to announce to my children also. Don't call me in the middle of Parsha Shir. Turn your phones to vibrate. And don't you know, Tuesday mornings, 9:30 by now. Gidul Banim. Shtickle Tsar. That's called Gidul Banim. Baruch Hashem, that's just Gidul Banim. Says Rav Druck, maybe now we can understand this Baal HaTurim. Why? Hanesiona Shaul Yaakov Avinu Lavan ve'Esav v'Dina ein ze nechshav k'tzar shel adam lesmodedim hanesionos lamin shekol ma Hashem osa latova uosa u'lischazek b'bitachon b'Kadosh Baruch Hu. Everything he had undergone until now, having to navigate Lavan, having to overcome and survive Esav, having to redeem and bring Dinah back home, all of that is not called Sa'ar, because that was things that you could surpass. Hatzar Eitzel Yaakov Avinu nechshav rak kasher ilo mikra shel ovdan ruchni. For Yaakov Avinu, physical challenges and crises, those are from Hashem for whatever reason, and Hashem should give us the strength to overcome, to navigate them. But spiritual challenges, spiritual tsar, kasher Yosef nistalek mimenu meshach esem mishtayim shana, 22 years that he thinks Yosef is gone. Lo hayayachol lilmod imom. He couldn't learn with him. He couldn't model for him. He couldn't transmit to him as his progeny, as the ambassador, as the one who would take over his legacy. That was Tsar Gidul Banim. Mela Yuvan Madu Ashanu Shcha Yaakov Avinu Mishanol Yosef V'ad L'Mechiros Nechshavim Keshanim B'lo Tsar. Now we can understand. The 17 years of Yosef's childhood, they were filled with difficulty and challenge, but they were far from ordinary, but they were surmountable. One could navigate them with faith in Hashem. But Ruchni, to lose a child, to not be able to learn with a child, to feel that child is gone, physically, spiritually, that is Tsar Gidul Banim, and that's why according to the Baal HaTurim, that's why it is understood, explained as such. Shaul Alter, Shlita, the Ger Rosh Yeshiva, the beautiful sefer that he gave me, says the following. Amazing idea. Rashi tells us this parsha, between Vayigash and Vayechi, we have something unusual that doesn't happen throughout the entire rest of the Torah. What is this unusual thing that happens? Says Rashi, Lama Parsha Zu Stuma. This parsha is Stuma. What does it mean to be Stuma? Something is blocked off or closed off. Rashi is making a pun. It's a play on words. What does it mean this parsha is Stuma? It's Stuma because Nistamu Eineihem. Nistamu Eineihem. It's a pun that only makes sense in Hebrew. In the translation, it loses its meaning. Stuma means closed off. There's no gap. There's no space. Vayigosh goes right into Vayechi. Stuma. It's closed off. And Eineihem, their eyes were closed off. The Rambam at the end of Hilchos Sefer Torah writes, there are 290 Parshios Psuchos, 290 times that there's a gap and it continues the text in the next line, and 379 Parshios Stumos. The difference between Psuchos and Stumos is whether or not the next Parsha starts on a new line or the same line. Psuchos begin on the next line, and Stumos begin on the same line, but both Psuchos and Stumos have at least a little gap, 9 osios away. Even Stumos, where the narrative continues on the same line, but there's a blank space, the equivalent of emptiness of 9 letters. This is the one case. Parshas Vayechi is unique, that Vayigash goes right into Vayechi without the 9 osios gap. There is no gap of 9 letters. It doesn't continue on the next line, continues on the same line, but with no gap and no break whatsoever. It's hard to appreciate. Even in the Art Scroll Chumash, they do a good job. Visually, you can get the idea. But if you look in a Sefer Torah, one would see it there explicitly. So Rashi, in a play on words, says, Lama Parsha Zu Stuma. Why is this the one exception? Not only does it not continue on the next line, it continues on the same line, but continues on the same line with no margin, with no gap, with no empty space of 9 letters. It goes right into it. Why? To teach us, Nistamu Eineihem V'Liban Shel Yisrael Mitzaras Hashibud. To teach us that Yaakov lived another 17 years in Mitzrayim, but the eyes of the Jewish people were closed. The hearts of the Jewish people were closed. Why? Shibud Mitzrayim. Because the servitude, the suffering, the persecution of Mitzrayim had begun. It started. That's the Parsha Zu is Stuma. So ask all the Mefarshim. We'll see 2 answers to this question. Let's start with Rav Shaul, with the Ger Rosh Yeshiva, Shlita. Hiksha Mefarshim Menal the Parshas, Vayigash Parshas, Vayechi Mischalkin Lebeis Parshios, How do you know that it's stuma? How do you know it's two parshios with no break? Maybe it's all one parsha. How do you know it's in fact two parshios? And the Maharal says, "Shaparshios is a stuma ve'ez a psucha. Heim kiblu kabbalah biyadenu me'ezra hasofer. Shaya sofer mahir b'toras Moshe uparshios elo achar shemechalkum us on the shtei parshios im kein al korcha chu kabbalah biyadenu." So the Maharal quotes that Ezra HaSofer, we have a tradition going back to Ezra. How do you break up the parshios? Much of the delineation of Tanakh is actually based on Christian editors and publishers, not Jewish. That's why some are makbid not to call it a perek, they call it a kapitel. They don't want to use the Hebrew word as if to suggest that this is a Jewish delineation. There's a difference between Chumash proper and other sections of Tanakh. It's a fascinating subject for another time. But we have a tradition from Ezra HaSofer. Ezra was a scribe, and he was a counter, and he knew exactly how to delineate, to count, and to be the scribe who would write Tanakh, Chumash. And we have a tradition, they're two separate parshios. And the Maharal adds, quote, and also, moreover, the parshios are not connected. Thematically, they don't continue. We know they're two separate parshios. So wonders, why is he giving another reason? Why is he giving another answer? And what's the Maharal? What do I need another reason for? And he says the following. Parshas Vayigash ends, Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen, Vayochsu ba vayifru vayirbe'u ma'od. Parshas Vayigash ends. We read it as a very benign pasuk. We read it nonchalantly. We just gloss over it. It's the end of Vayigash. Parsha perspectives, who knows if we'll ever get to it. It's the end of the Parsha. So we just glance over it. And what does it say? When Yaakov and his children came down, when this reunion occurred, Vayeshev. What does the word Vayeshev mean? To dwell, to take up residence, to move in permanently. Where? Be'eretz Mitzrayim, Be'eretz Goshen. Vayochsuba, and they grabbed onto the land. They embedded themselves in that place, in that land. Vayifru, vayirbu ma'od. And they promulgated and propagated, and they spread and they multiplied. Shachin medubar ala shiftei ka, she'en lanu asag b'hem kla. We're talking about, of course, the great shiftei ka. And of course, we always have to give this disclaimer. They're not like us. They're categorically different. They're great. We shouldn't project ourselves onto them. End of disclaimer. That said, Aval ksiv sheyashvu, where? Begalas. These children, these 12 tribes, 11 at least of whom, were raised in Eretz Yisrael, were raised in the Holy Land, at the lap of their Holy Father, now moved to Galus, and instead of seeing themselves there in the diaspora, on Shlichus, temporarily for a mission, Vayeshvu be'eretz Mitzrayim. They moved in. Vayochzuba, and they grabbed onto it, because we're proud to be Egyptians. Vayifru vayirbu ma'od shenishku b'socha galus, and they became immersed, intertwined. They became linked with galus. V'ila b'parshas Vayechi tamun etza amuka eich nitan lahachzik ma'amad b'galus. Now we get to Vayechi, and all of a sudden we have embedded within it the hint, the illusion. How can we survive galus? V'hu sod ha'geula. What is the secret to redemption? How can we survive the darkness, the harshness of this exile, this diaspora, living among hostile nations, being foreigners? How can we survive? Sheyakov Avinu alav shalom amar ve'elokim pakod yifkod eschem ve'ela eschem in ha'aretz hazos. Those secret words, those magic words were embedded. That is the code, how to survive galus, Chazal say. Which two words? Pakod yifkod eschem. What does pakod yifkod mean? To be counted, to be a number, but also to be separate, to be apart. God will ha'elah, He's going to lift you. He's going to elevate you from ha'aretz hazos, this place. You don't belong. You're here temporarily. You're here as a stranger. Yosef says, even though I will die, Hashem pakod yivkod. This is a siman shein nigalim. Rashi in the third parak of Shemos tells, you're not going to be here forever. This is the exact antithesis. This is the opposite. This is the antidote to V'yochzuba. So Vayigash was all about the mistake of getting confused and saying, Skolas is gewaldig. Skolas, it's fantastic. We can live free, practice our religion, establish kollalim and yeshivas, learn, shuls, kosher restaurants, wear our yarmulkes. It's amazing. Vayeshvu. We could live here. We could see ourselves here permanently. That's Vayigash. That was the mistake of the Gullus. What was the antidote? What's the answer? What's the repair? What's the code? How to get redemption? How to get out? Pakod Yivkod is the opposite of Vayochsiba. V'hinei Parsha stuma machmas haGullus. Amnas haGullus yichol lios b'shnei ofanim. So this Parsha is closed because of the Gullus. But a Gullus can happen in two ways. Vayisarvu b'goyim umivla bloi behem. We could get intermingled and intermixed and assimilated with our host nation. Or we can be living there temporarily, yes, but an independent and apart, separate. And that's where the words pakod pakarati come in. The Gemara has a machlokas in Psachim. Imashkin mivla bli'i or mifkad pkidi. You have it at the beginning of Mesachas Nida, having to do with anatomy. You have it in Mesachas Psachim, whether liquids are absorbed entirely or they're not absorbed, they're just within a pocket of the thing that's holding them. When you squeeze grapes and wine comes out, when you squeeze a grape and you get grape juice that ferments into wine, is the wine or the grape juice something new? Something new? It used to be a grape, and now it's grape juice. And the grape juice is transformed as different than a grape. Or no, the grape always held the grape juice within it. So this was always grape juice. It used to be grape juice inside a grape, and now it's grape juice outside a grape, but it was always grape juice. Is this something new? It used to be a grape, and now it was squeezed and transformed into grape juice. Or no, it was always grape juice. It used to be grape juice inside the grape, and now it's grape juice outside of the grape. Ella mufkadim bepri, kadavar nifrad emunach b'toch davar acher, v'ata yatsa l'chutz v'nafkamina l'tmei meishan ogea ba'anavim. And you're wondering, a little lumdus here. When you're wondering, well, what's the difference? Who cares? Is grape juice a grape that became juice? Or was it always grape juice inside the grape? Now it's grape juice outside the grape. What's the nafkamina? A chakira, a chilak. Without a nafkamina is nishkan chilak. It's not a chakira. So what's the nafkamina? What's the practical difference between the two? Says the Gemara, whether a tmei mace who touches the grape, is it considered also touching the juice or not? So if the juice used to be the grape, so it's tamei too. If it was held inside, so that language, pakod, is it mifkad pkidi or mivla bli'i? Is the same language of our parsha, pakod pakadati. See yourself as different, just held inside. It's not that you're part of and defined by and identify with. You're different, you're separate, you're apart, you're distinct. You're just held inside. That's Gullus. Gullus is not absorbed and integrated and assimilated. Gullus is separate and apart, just within, just dwelling within. Pakod Yivkod. That's the siman. That was the siman. He has a long essay here, and he goes on, which I'd love to share with you, but we don't have time. But he describes these words that Chazal saw within them entirely, embedded the answer and the way out. And this is the way out for us. And when we forget, Hashem and the world around us remind us. Pakod Pakarati. We're just guests. You can't integrate. Don't think you could assimilate. Not in the 20th century in Eastern Europe and Germany, in the enlightened and the world of Haskalah, when we want to assimilate, the nations of the world remind us that we are different and separate and apart. You happen to just be here for now, but you're not fully integrated. When we forget, they remind us, and we're seeing that now. But there's another question. Chatzkel Weinfeld, Shlita, who was a guest here last year, he wonders, a great question. Rashi says this Parsha Stuma, No break between Vayigash and Vayechi. Why? Shenistimu einayim v'liban sheYisrael mitzaras hashibud. When does the tzaras hashibud start? When do we begin to experience the suffering of the servitude? When? After Yaakov dies. After these 17 years. So when should the stuma be? Between Vayechi and Shmos? Or somewhere later in Vayechi, after Yaakov dies. After Yaakov dies, and we lose the merit of Yaakov, we lose the merit of the Shifteka, of the holy tribes, holy sons. So then the servitude kicks in. That's when it should be stuma. Their eyes are closed, their hearts were closed, they were suffering the servitude. Why is it now, at the beginning of the Parsha, while Yaakov is still alive, and the beginning of the description of these 17 wonderful years of retirement in Mitzrayim? It must be, says Rav Weinfeld, that already Yaakov, during these last 17 years, was teaching us how it's going to be in Gullus. It was a sense of a preparation and anticipation for what life is going to be like in Gullus. In Gullus, people are going to have nistimu einayim v'libam. You know what Gullus is? When people are suffering, they become wrapped up in their own problems. Their eyes are closed to see the struggles of others. Their hearts are closed to be able to feel with sympathy and empathy the pain of others. People become self-absorbed, they become self-centered. And there's no greater Gullus. There's no greater Gullus than a community of people who are self-absorbed and self-centered. But if you want to bring Geula, people have to do exactly the opposite. So Yaakov was already teaching us on the way into this state of Gullus, nistimu einayim v'libam. Gullus is when your eyes and your hearts are closed and you don't see people and you don't see their suffering. And what is Geula? Geula is when you open your eyes, and Geula is when you open your hearts. So a little preview for next week. For Shemos, what happens? Moshe, Vayi bayamim mahim vayigdal Moshe, vayitu lachav, vayar b'sivlosam. Vayar b'sivlosam, Moshe Rabbeinu opens his eyes, vayar. He has every right to hide and live in the palace in complete safety and security, and yet he can't. He can't help but go out, vayar, and open his eyes and open his hearts and see the pain of his brothers. Later it says, vayar Elokim es bnei Yisrael, vayeda Elokim, and Rashi says, nasan aleim leiv v'lo ha'elim einav. We see during the Gullus, people's eyes and hearts are closed, they become self-centered, they're hurting, they're just worried about their own survival. They're worried about getting to the end of the day. They're worried about their own chronic pain. But what's the answer? The way out, counterintuitively, is not to focus on yourself. The way out, Geula, comes how? When you open your eyes and you open your heart and you become selfless. That's when Geula comes. That's when Geula comes. So Rashi says, Stuma. Why is this Parsha Stuma? Because it's the beginning of the end, the beginning of Gullus. And Yaakov is already teaching on the way into Gullus what is the formula and what will be the way out. He doesn't say this, Rav Weinfeld, but you see this also in the Chidushei HaRim. The penultimate plague is Choshech. It's the second to last, second to worst, second to most intense plague that we had. Choshech. Why is Choshech so terrible? Darkness. Lo ra'u ish es achiv. Because people did not see others. Says the Heilige Chidushei HaRim, when a person doesn't see another person, that is a horrific plague. That's a makkah. Lo ra'u ish es achiv. To not see the people around you. To worry and see only yourselves and not connect with and feel the pain and want to relieve the suffering of the people around you, that's Gullus. That's Gullus. And what's Geula? Geula, redemption comes when you care. When you care. And you see this in modern research. People suffering and struggling from depression. The answer is not lean into your own problems, dwell and focus on your own trials and tribulations. One of the treatments for depression today is volunteer. Go do something good for someone else. Break out of looking inward, see outward, care, help others, and it has an extraordinary difference in transforming your own Gullus. When a person is in a personal place of Gullus, of darkness and despondency and despair, don't lean in. Don't lean into Town Center or Neiman Marcus or Lord & Taylor or Bloomingdale's. Lean into volunteering, to giving and doing and helping, because the Geula, the answer to that Gullus of Stuma nistimu einayim v'libam is to open one's eyes, vayar b'sivlosam, to open one's heart, to be able to see es achiv, to not live in a state and a place of choshech. Moving right along, Berenbaum Zayin Pasuk Lamed Aleph. Vayomer. So what happens? Yaakov comes down. He says, I have a favor. Swear to me. He tells Yosef, get me out of here. Bury me in Maras Machpelah. And he says, I'll do it. Anochi esa kidvarecha, I'll do what you ask. Vayomer hishav ali vayishav alav vayishtachu Yisrael al rosh hamita. Swear to me. He swore to him, and Yisrael then prostrated himself toward the head of the Ben. Our first Tifer Shmuel of the day. Says Rav Shmuel Berenbaum. Rashi, El Rosh Hamita, what does it mean that Yisrael, Yaakov, leaned down, bent down, bowed down towards the head of the bed? Al Shahais Hamitaso Shlema, V'lo Hayabo Rasha. In that moment that Yosef swore to him, he said, Tati, Abba, Dad, Pops, I'm good for it. I swear, I'll get you out of here. I won't leave you permanently interred here. I will bring you to Eretz Yisrael. I'll bring you to Eretz Yisrael. We have a small, Rabbi Brody led yet another mission this week. They're in Israel. And they stopped at Eretz Chaim, a cemetery in Israel. And one of the people on it sent me a beautiful picture. He davened at the graves of my grandparents who are buried in the Bira section of Eretz Chaim. They passed away many years ago. My grandfather when I was 4 years old, my grandmother when I was in high school, many years ago. But they were only buried in Israel recently. How could that be? Because they were buried in a cemetery in Staten Island. And my father moved my grandparents to Eretz Yisrael. Like the fulfillment of Yosef in his promise to his father Yaakov, my siblings live in Israel. My parents are in Israel. Please God, our children and grandchildren will all be in Israel. And he wanted to honor them by moving them to Israel. It was actually there was a Hakamas Matzeva. It's an amazing thing to have an unveiling decades after people pass away. When they're moved, reinterred, if they were buried on condition, you're allowed to move them. If you bring them to Eretz Yisrael, you're allowed to move them. Anyway, he took a picture. He davened at the graves of my grandparents in Eretz Chaim. It's a very beautiful thing. So Yosef makes a promise to Yaakov. Yaakov says, don't leave me here. Don't leave me here. Bury me in Eretz Yisrael. Bury me in Eretz Yisrael. He did not want to be permanently in Mitzrayim. I once went to Cuba for a day with a delegation from here. Saw the small fledgling Jewish community left in Cuba. And we visited the Cuban cemetery. One of the people with us, actually, grandparents lived in Cuba when they fled from the Nazis. And his grandfather, one of the rabbis who was with us, his grandfather is buried in the cemetery in Cuba. And then the revolution, the family fled. He had never been to Cuba. It was the first time at his grandfather's grave. And the cemetery in Cuba, is beautiful, the Jewish cemetery. There's a Tahara room. There are Matzeva's headstones made out of marble. Beautiful. And do you know when his grandfather was buried, this was all I could think. When his grandfather was buried, there was a thriving Jewish community in Cuba. Shuls and kollel and yeshivas and kashrus. And it was a thriving Jewish community. And then the revolution happened and Jews fled. And there's almost nothing left of the Jewish community of Cuba. And for a long time, no one could go and visit. And it was his first time there and possibly and probably his last time there. When his grandfather was buried, they thought we'll be here forever. Look at this thriving Jewish community. And now we know what it is. So Yaakov understood, where is the one place that Jews will go and visit and be forever? There's only one place. There is only one place. Don't leave me in Mitzrayim. Maybe 70 of us are going down now. Maybe you're the viceroy right now. Maybe it feels like we'll be here forever, but this is not where we belong. This is not home. This is not, if we get it right, where great-grandchildren will come to visit. So bring me to Israel. Bring me to Eretz Yisrael. Bring me to Israel. And Yosef promises, and Yaakov reacts to that promise like a shtickle overreaction. Bows down towards the head of the bed and, wow, thank you so much, and I can't believe it, and I'm so... Okay, it's nice. Yosef promises him. It's nice that Yosef says, don't worry, I'm not going to leave you here. But did it really deserve that reaction? So Rashi tells us, you know what the reaction was? It wasn't about the prospect of being buried in Israel. What was the reaction about? Mitaso shlema. Wow, my family is complete. When I leave this world, as I die, all my children are on the derech. All my grandchildren, lohaya barasha. Shahara Yosef melachaya, says Rashi. Yosef was a king. Shenishba leben hagoyim. He was captured. He grew up. He lived. His formative years were in Mitzrayim among non-Jews. Harayu omed b'tzidko, and with this promise, he understood that Yosef is righteous, that Yosef gets it, that Yosef is raising his children on this path. And he felt a sense of relief, the enormous sense of relief. So wonders of Shmuel Berenbaum Tifer Shmuel Lama Davka Achri Shekibel Yosef Al Atzma Likvor Aviv. Why now when he accepts upon himself to bury his father? Hoda Yaakov Hakadosh Baruch Hu Azeh Shari Mitaso Shlema V'lo Miyakesh Nichnas Yosef Etzlo. Why aren't you all asking this question? Why didn't you all jump out of your chairs to ask this question? Tifer Shmuel asks an obvious question. Why only now is Yaakov relieved? Yosef gets it. Ephraim and Menashe get it. I'm good to go. All my children, Bli Ayin Hara, are on the derech. When should Yaakov have felt that sense of relief? When should he have expressed that gratitude? When should he have bowed down to God and said, Baruch Hashem, they're all on the derech, Bli Ayin Hara? When? When he first came down. When he first came down to Mitzrayim, when he first saw Yosef, first time he encountered Ephraim and Menashe. Yesh Lamar. So why is it only now when Yosef promises, yes, I'll move you, I'll carry you, I'll schlep you, I'll bury you in Eretz Israel. So why now? Shekasher kiba Yosef alatzmo lamalis bakashas aviv miyad beli kol hayisus ra Yaakov she'af abisha yimishna lamelach lo asas azum mishum hashpa Yosef ki arei lo ichbas lo ma yom reparo Mitzrayim afilu im yisnagdu lo bezeh umizeh hevin shu amid betzidko ki lo hayim Mitzrayim ela kilu hu nimtza bebeis aviv. Yosef didn't say, I hear your request, let me get back to you. I need to just run this by Paro. I need to make sure it works with the cabinet. I got to go to the legal office. I gotta make sure it's okay. Let me take a poll in the field and see how it'll play. Yosef doesn't do any of that. What does he say? Yeah, of course. I got it, 100%. And only now, and only with this, does Yaakov understand that Yosef is not influenced by what the polls will show. Yosef is not influenced by what Paro will allow. Yosef is true to his father and to his father's legacy. The Mishnah, the second paragraph of Abba says, be careful about government, because they only come close to you for their own personal gain. They only have a relationship with you to get votes, to get campaign financing. But Yosef was an exception to this rule. Yes, wrote that Yosef was a politician. Yes, Yosef was in government. But Yosef was not manipulative and self-centered. Yosef cared about others. Even though when a person receives honor and glory and money from someone, he's influenced by them. What gave reassurance to Yaakov about Yosef was that he saw that Yosef was independent, that Yosef rose above, that Yosef didn't care about how it will play. And when Yaakov saw that Yosef, with all of his influence and all of his power, was not influenced by the people who gave it to him, only now did he accept that Yosef was complete, Yosef was good to go, Yosef was independent, and Yosef would be the credible ambassador of his legacy. Perek Mem Ches, Pasuk Ches. You know what? Actually, let's skip. We're going to do something unusual. We're going to go to the end of the Parsha, then we'll come back. Because here we saw that Yaakov makes Yosef promise, you'll bury me in Eretz Yisrael. Did he make good on the promise? Did he make good on the promise? Skip. Perek Nun, Pasuk Yud Gimel. See? Don't give up on me. I'm trying to learn. I'm a work in progress. That's what I tell you, Chavit. Perek Nun, Pasuk Yud Gimel, which is on page 286 in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash. Vayasu vanav lo ken kasher tzivam. Children did for him as they promised. Vayisu oso banav arza Canaan, and his children took him to the land of Canaan. Vayikbru oso b'ma'aras stay hamachpelah asher kana Avram es hasadel achuz atzkever me'is Ephron achiti al pnei Mamre. So Yaakov dies. Yosef makes good on the promise with his brothers. They carry him to the land of Canaan. They bury him in Ma'aras Machpelah, the field that Avram had brought as a burial state from Ephron Hachiti, facing Mamre. When was this? When did Yaakov die? Let's pull out an oldie but goodie, the Otzar Peleos HaTorah. We didn't get to it last year. The Otzar Peleos HaTorah. When was this? The Medrash Tanchuma tells us. When was this? When did Yaakov die? Sorry, the Sefer Shar HaMelech says, and it's also in the Drush of the Chassam Sofer. Yaakov Avinu Meis. What's Yaakov Avinu's yurtzeit? Anyone know? Nobody knows? Don't feel bad, I didn't know. Yaakov Avinu died on the first day of Sukkot. Azoi Zok Tachsam Sofer. The Bnei Saschar brings a remez v'davar from the pasuk. Yaakov nasa Sukkosa. Yaakov went to Sukkot. When did Yaakov depart and leave Nasa, this world? Sukkosa, on Sukkot. So the first day of Sukkot, even though the Ushpizin is Avram, next year on Sukkot you'll remember, it's the year outside of Yaakov Avinu, at least according to the Chassam Sefer, the Bnei Saschar, the Shara Melech. Chassam Sofer brings another opinion. Ein rachuk shayakvurasa biyom. When was his funeral? There's another opinion. When was the Levaya? When was he buried in Maras Machpelah? I'll give you a hint. We just observed it, and you were hungry. Asara B'Teves. Chassam Sofer says, Yaakov Avinu's Levaya, his funeral, his burial was on Asara B'Teves. There's another opinion. The Bnei Saschar brings a second opinion. Yaakov Avinu was buried on Chanukah. On Chanukah. That he died on the first day of Sukkot, and 70 days till Chanukah was complete, and then he was buried. Another Sefer brings a third opinion, B'Shem Baal Hasod, the one who keeps secrets. The Yaakov Avinu is buried again on the first day of Sukkot. The fourth opinion is Dvash, B'Yenis and Eibshitz, based on the Gemara. Yaakov Avinu meis b'Pesach. He died on Pesach. Gam Beretz Yisrael Nog Yosef, Avela Shiva Yomim Kodem Akvura, Mitzrayim LeChevron, is a 6-day travel. All these different opinions exactly when he died, when his Yurtzeit was. I'm not tikpareni bin Mitzrayim. Don't bury me in Mitzrayim. But I want to share with you something else amazing. Something else amazing. Vayisu oso banav, the children take him. Vayikberu oso, they bury him in Maras Machpelah. Maras Machpelah. Says the Medrash. Say Chazal. Kevin shegiu to Maras Machpelah. When they got to Maras Machpelah, you know this. Asa, who came out to greet them? They wanted to bury Yaakov, but there was someone there blocking them. Who was blocking them? Esav. Kama Akev, Amar Lahem, Mamre Kiris Arba Yechevron. So what happens? They get there, Esav comes out, was preventing them from burying them. Amar Yitzchak Kiris Arba Zugos Hayu Adam Chava, Avram Asar, Yitzchak Berivka, Yaakov Aleya, Iu Kavre Laleya B'didei, V'hai De Payesh Didihu. It's called Kiryat Arba. Why? Kiryat Arba, the mayor of Kiryat Arba. His son is still being held hostage. We daven for his return with all the others. There were 4 couples who were buried there. So Esav says, okay, let's count. Yaakov buried Leah in this spot, and the spot that's remaining is mine. Me. Amr lo, so Yaakov's children say to Esav, Zabente, you sold your rights to our father. You don't have a right to this spot. It went with the Bechor, it went with the firstborn. It's true, I sold the birthright, but I didn't sell my rights to the burial site. I'm a Pasha, I still have a status of an ordinary brother, and I belong in Maras Machpelah. So I'm going in, I'm saving the spot for me. Find another place for your father, for my brother Yaakov. Amrulay, they said, they said, yeah, those 2 sales went together. With the birthright went the burial right. They go together. And he brought a raya to this. So Amar Lahu Esav tries again. He says, bring me the contract. I want to see the contract. If you bought a cemetery plot, which you all should, it's a school of Arichas Yamim. If you don't have, you should. It's one of the greatest gifts you could give your children, is to do all your preparations in your lifetime, both to pay for it now. A burial plot is a piece of real estate. Real estate is only going up in value. The longer you wait, the more it will cost. And a great gift you can give is to be clear exactly what you want, where you want, how you want, what you want said, who do you want to speak, where do you want. The more you can clarify what you want, the less ambiguity, the less room for fighting and tension, the less compounding the grief of your children and grandchildren after 120. It's a big gift that you can give them. And it's a skula for Arichas Yamim. At least that's what the cemeteries say when they try to sell you a plot. It's a skula for Arichas Yamim. And you can buy a plot in Eretz HaChaim at the BRS section or the BRS section in Hollywood. But I'm not trying to sell you anything. It's a skula for Arichas Yamim. So Esav says, if you ever signed that contract, it's longer than the mortgage on your house. You got to sign a lot of papers. So Esav says, bring me the paperwork. Let me see the paperwork. You can't prove your claims that I sold my right. So Amar Le, Igarta Ba'ar de Mitzrayimi. we just schlepped up here, Maras Machpelah Chevron. We left the contract where in Mitzrayim. Uman Nezel Naphtali the Kalil. So they said, who will go bring it? Naphtali. Because the pasuk tells us that Naphtali was as quick as a doe. So go, run. Shlucha Nosa Nimer Shefer. Amar Avavo Al Tikri Nimer Shefer Nimer Shefer. Chushim Brei. In the meantime, Chushim Brei the Dan. Dan had a son named Chushim. Taman Hava. The Akiran Le Udnei. His ears were heavy. He was hard of hearing. He didn't hear well. And they hadn't invented yet hearing aids. He was not able to hear. Amar Lahu, my high. So he can't understand what's going on. He can't hear anything. He's missing out on the whole conversation between Esav and his nephews. And he says, my high, what's going on? Amar Lei Kama Akev Hai Ad Asi Naftali Me'ar de Mitzrayim. He said, Esav's blocking us. Even though we just came up here and schlepped up here, now we got to wait for Naphtali to go back down, get the contract, and return. It's going to take forever. In the meantime, we're dishonoring our father, Yaakov, whom we brought to be buried here in Masa Machpelah, where he rightfully deserves to go. And what happens? Shkal Kulfa Machye Aresha. What does he do? Chushim, the son of Dan, what does he do? He takes a club, a kulfa, and he hits Esav, his uncle Esav, on the head. And Esav's eyes fall out, and they fell on the legs of Yaakov. Yaakov opens his eyes and smiles. Azay is the Chazal. That's the Chazal. Esav's trying to block them. They have this whole negotiation. He insists you get the contract. While Naphtali is running to go get the contract, Dan has a son named Chushim. Chushim is deaf. He can't follow what's going on. So they signal to him a little bit so he barely understands. And while Naphtali is going to get the contract and everybody else is busy negotiating, he takes a club and beats his uncle Esav, great uncle Esav, over the head. Yaakov gets a little nachas, and Kilo opens his eyes and smiles. What happens here in this chazal? V'yik Baruoso, end of the Parsha. Skip to the end of the Parsha. How could Yaakov's own children have left and waited? Yaakov's body is laying while Naphtali goes to and from Mitzrayim. Only Chushim was bold enough, courageous enough, brave enough to confront Uncle Esav. Everyone else was willing to tolerate the degrading of Yaakov, that he sits there while waiting. What's going on over here? What's going on over here? So I want to tell you an incredible pshat in the Sefer Einei Yitzchak. It appears in his commentary on the Gemara Sota Daf Yud Gimel, and it says the following. He's the one who asked this question. Yish l'tmoa, lama lo shal af echad me'ashvatim es ha'she'ela azu, ad sheyashav Naphtali mitzrayim ye'aba mutav bizayon. Why wasn't anyone else bothered by the thought of Yaakov laying and wait? Why would he laying there? How could they tolerate such a matzav? On the Bir Adavar, the explanation is the following. Esav kfi goda risho haya ish sheodeh tzayed befiv. Esav was not only a hunter with his hands, Esav was a master manipulator with his lips, with his words. He was a salesman. He could sell you the shirt on your back. He could sell snow to an Eskimo. He was manipulative and deceitful, and he was persuasive, and he was a salesman. Esav, hunting with his words, with his mouth, had even convinced his nephews. Your father was delirious. Your father had dementia. Your father was confused. He forgot that, yes, he bought the birthright, but the grave doesn't go with it. He forgot it doesn't belong to him. He was confused. Trust your Uncle Esav. Would I lie to you? I'm telling you the truth. It's mine. It belongs to me. We'll find another a place for your father Yaakov, for my brother. But this spot, Marasa Machpelah, it goes with me. Meirov pituye dvarav. And sometimes there are people who are manipulative with their words, but they're so compelling and persuasive, you actually start second-guessing yourself. You don't believe, and you lose the confidence in yourself. And you wonder, maybe they're right. Maybe what they're saying is true. They said, we need to clarify. Maybe Uncle Esav's right. It's pretty compelling, pretty persuasive. His words. reach their hearts. He said, go get the contract. It's worth waiting. Yes, it's a bizayon to our father Yaakov, but Naphtali, you're fast. Go run to Mitzrayim, go get the contract, go review, let's go see. So what happens with great nephew Chushim, with Dun's son Chushim? Why was he different, and where did he get the courage to step up and to stand up? Chushim ben Dun was deaf, and therefore, because he was deaf, he didn't hear the words of his uncle Esav. He wasn't debilitated, he wasn't frozen, he wasn't still, he didn't hesitate, he wasn't gripped by Esav's words. Chushim beglasha yakavit shmiya hu lo shamas kol divrei hachal kolokos shel Esav v'shalos achiv lama lo kovrim. Says, what's going on over here? Heshiva lo beremez of a kitzer, so they hinted to, they alluded to. Esav machash divrei Yaakov. Esav's holding us up, he's got some other claim. K'sheshama zos Chushim chara apo. Chushim was enraged, he was outraged. He didn't buy anything that Esav was selling. And therefore he acted. He took the club and he hit him over the head. And what's the message to us? The message to us is, sometimes you got to be deaf. Sometimes you have to be deaf and act. Don't listen to the pundits and the experts and the analysts. Don't listen to the world and the commentators. Don't listen to people who sound compelling or persuasive or act like they're getting it right, but couldn't be more wrong. Don't be those who are deceitful and manipulative with their words. Be like Chushim. Sometimes we're so caught up in media and social media and news cycles that thrive on hype and hyperbole. Don't believe it. Don't buy into it. Turn off the volume. Shut it off. Be like Chushim ben Dun. Sometimes with all the noise that's going on around us, that can be seductive and persuasive and compelling and make us second guess what we know to be true, that can tug on our heartstrings and pull on our emotions. Sometimes we need to be more like Chushim ben Dun. Sometimes you got to go deaf. Turn off the noise. Disconnect. Return to what we know to be simple and clear and obvious truths in a way that is not complicated, so that we will act. Sometimes, like Chushim, you have to go and you have to be willing to be a little bit deaf. A little bit deaf. Let's go back to the Parsha. Ephraim and Menashe. See that? Beginning of the Parsha went to the end. We're trying. Back to Perek Mem Ches. Perek Mem Ches, Pasuk Yud Ches. It's the end of Yaakov's life. He's giving out brachas. Yosef brings his sons, Ephraim and Menashe. And Yaakov puts his hands on the wrong ways. I know, I got it right. It's just I know more about these children and their potential and what direction they're going in. I get it more right than you. It's a whole strange, peculiar conversation going on here, the back and forth between Yosef and his father over these sons. What exactly was Yaakov worried about? Right? When Yaakov first sees Ephraim and Menashe, Vayechi Yosef, Vayechi Yisrael's bnei Yosef, Vayomer mi Eila. He says, who are they? And Yosef says, don't worry, these are my kids. He's been learning with them his whole time in Mitzrayim. Now he wonders, mi Eila? What's going on here, mi Eila? That he doesn't recognize them. And how does Yosef appease them? Rav Druck in Lavos Eish quotes his father, Rav Mordechai Druck, the Drash Mordechai. Avi Mori bir bezeshakol adoros yeshna yeridas hadoros. We have a doctrine called the decline of the generations, Yeridas Hadoros. Chazal understood that with generations, the further away we are from Har Sinai, the further removed we are from that moment of great revelation, the lower we go, the more that we lose. Yeridas Hadoros, the doctrine of decline. Gemara Brachos says, Ein karan avos ela l'shlosha. V'ashvatim hakadoshim kvar lo nikru avos. We only have 3 avos and 4 imahos, and after that, the shvatim are not called avos or imahos. The Gemara Shabbos Kuf Yud Beis, Im Rishonim b'nei Malachim, Anu b'nei Anashim. If the early ones were like angels, we're people. If the earlier ones were the people, we're donkeys. And not like a righteous donkey, like a stinky donkey. So you read this Hadoros. That's the way the world goes. We lose something, you read this Hadoros. However, here is an exception. Ephraim and Menashe Keruven v'Shimon Yuli. What Yaakov sees is this is an exception to that rule. Ephraim and Menashe are not less or lower or decline. Ephraim and Manasseh have the same status as the generation before them. And that, in fact, is therefore, says Rav Mordechai Druck, the Drash Mordechai, that is why we give our children a bracha on Friday nights. Yisimcha Elokim ke Ephraim and Manasseh. Why? I don't want you to read this Hadoros. I want you to be not like me. I want you to be greater than me. Even though the way of the world is you read this Hadoros, even though generally there's a decline, who broke that cycle? Who are the exceptions to that rule? Ephraim and Manasseh. And that's our hope and that's our wish for our own children. Yisimcha Elokim ke Ephraim and Manasseh, two brothers who got along. First generation where there wasn't sibling rivalry. Two brothers who got along, even though the younger one was elevated above the older one. And despite the potential for strife, they got along. That's our hope for our children. And two who were born and raised in that exile, that gullus, and nevertheless clung to their values and their Yiddishkeit. That's our hope to children. And also because breaking the cycle of decline, our hope is Keruvim v'Shimon Yili. They're not a doctrine of decline, but they'll be. And therefore you could explain, Yaakov says, Kachemna Elai va'avarchem. Shama lo b'zeh she'egbias Menashe v'Ephraim l'dor shelo. Lift them to your generation. Kachemna Elai va'avarchem. Shelo tei bahem yeridus hadoros. Va'az yuchal levarchem. Ki yu hem kedoro l'lo nefila she'yeridus hadoros. May they be an exception. May they transcend this doctrine of decline. I shared many times, I had an uncle who passed away. My uncle Eli, Rabbi Eli Lazar, and his children collected his beautiful Divrei Torah that he said on different family life cycle occasions. And in there, he once said at a bris of a grandchild, we say, Zeh katan gadol yihiyeh. May this child, may this little pitzkala grow to be a gadol. May they go from being a katan to a gadol. Soloveitchik has a beautiful insight. The Me'ora katan and Me'ora gadol, the moon is called the small luminary, and the sun is called the great luminary. And from here we learn what's the difference between a gadol and a katan. The moon is not a source of light. The moon is just a reflection of the light of the sun. A katan is something that doesn't have its own independent radiance. It's just a reflection of that which is greater than it. The Zeh katan, this little pitzkala who will just reflect his parents, gadol yiyeh, may he become a source of light himself. That's Zeh katan gadol yiyeh. But my uncle, Olav Shalom, said a different shot. He said we should read it, we don't say this word, but we should read it as if we say, Zeh katan gadol mimeni yihiyeh. May this one who right now knows less, earns less, keeps less, observes less, is less developed, less smart, but may they surpass me. That's the Jewish hope and aspiration. We're not jealous of our own children. We don't compete with our own children. We don't want our own children to earn less than us. Too many people, too many Jews, they want their kids to be exactly where they are. I come to shul, a 9 o'clock minyan. I get there at 9:26. If my kid comes 9:25, they're a religious fanatic. If they come 9:27, they're off the derech. What's going to be with this reject? I come at 9:26, they have to come 9:26. I eat these hechsherim, they have to eat these hechsherim. Too many are so worried. We're worried if they do a little bit less, they're off the derech. If they do a little bit more, they're a religious fanatic. Where did I go wrong? And it's instructive which one people are more afraid of. Being less religious or more than religious. Which people are more afraid of. But really that's not who we are. Our wish, our hope, our dream, our aspiration is Zeh katan gadol mimeni yihiyeh. That our children should be greater than us. Greater than us. You know, you don't hear parents say, I went to City College, I don't want them to go to, now nobody should want their kid to go to Ivy League. But back once, if it ever was safe, spiritually, religiously, back when it was safe, you heard people say, you know, I couldn't go to college, I want them to go to college. I went to the City College, I want my kid to go to Ivy League college. I only got the BA, I want my kid to be a doctor, get a graduate degree. Everyone wants more. What about religiously? What about spiritually? We should also want them to be more. Know more, observe more, not be threatened, not be afraid of that. We should be proud of that. It's exactly what we daven for. It's exactly what you daven for. In a world in which, and this is full circle, the beginning of this year, we'll end with this. We saw the pshat of Tsar Gidol Banim. You know what Tsar Gidol Banim is? That after all the Gidol Banim, all you got was Tsar. That's Tsar Gidol Banim. Tsar Gidol Banim is not that they had temperature, got the flu, threw up on your kitchen floor, climbed into your bed in the middle of the night. That's not Tsar Gidol Banim. You know what that's called? Gidol Banim. that they broke their screen on their phone for the 15th time. That's called Gidul Banim. I'll give you a lot more examples, but that's called Gidul Banim. Tsar Gidul Banim is after all the Gidul Banim, what you got was Tsar. That's what you should be afraid of, not that they came back religiously on fire and inspired. That's what you daven for. That's what we all daven for. So that's what the bracha, Yisimcha Lokim Kefraim Menashe, is that even though there's ordinarily a Yeridas Hadoros, even though there's a decline, Ephraim and Menashe were not a decline. They were like Yeruven v'Shimon Yuli, and that's our hope for our children. Kinderlach Kefraim Menashe. I want you to be Gadol Mimeni. I want you to know more, keep more, daven better, have better midos, give more tzedakah, learn more Torah, be more righteous than I am. I want you to surpass me. I want you to be the exception to the rule, Yeridas Hadoros. That's our tefillah, that's our bracha for our children on Friday night. Please stay to help us complete Sefer Tehillim a few times. You should hear Besoros Tovos.